Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness, and Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is Donovan, my amazing co-host. And today we are going to be talking about how to not care about what other people think. Easier said than done, probably. So, Donovan, let's get started. What are your thoughts with how to not care about what other people think?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that this is more of an aspiration for people than a reality, right? I think what you see most commonly is people going like, oh, I care way too much about what other people think. I see this other person, they look super confident. They don't care what anyone thinks. They just do whatever they want and they are fine with it all the time. And I don't think it's super realistic or even really help. I guess it's not, I don't think it's optimal to not care at all what anyone thinks, right? Mm-hmm. And there are some people who fall in that category. And while they may be able to do a lot of the stuff that they want to do or enjoy doing and not think about the consequences or impacts on other people, mm-hmm. those are often also the people that you see doing things that are really rude, really obnoxious, really ridiculous. So I think kind of my initial thought is not caring about what people think is probably the more adaptive strategy, is not aiming for that exactly, but it's more along the lines, it's something more nuanced, right? It's something more around like, how do I step into and do the kinds of things that I want to do without feeling pressured or judged or making up sort of these sort of stories that other people are putting me down in their mind or even explicitly. But I think it's a little more nuanced than sort of the topic lends itself to just on the surface. But I'd be curious what you think.
Yeah, for me, when I think about this, to some degree, we all care about what other people think. But what I want to distinguish is, are you letting that determine how you live your life or not? It's like, oh, I'm not going to, like, just a silly example. Oh, all my friends are wearing purple like in high school, and I don't want to be, they're going to think I'm weird if I don't wear purple. This is just a really silly example that's probably not accurate, but just like illustrate a point. But I have this favorite blue colored shirt that I really want to wear, but I'm afraid that people will judge me because I'm not matching my friends or something like to that degree. Having it determine your actions, I think helps determine how you live your life, and you're kind of living in this illusion in a way. One thing I really want to say is that you have to realize that people are always going to think things. That is the nature of being a human being, is that they're going to make judgments, and that's kind of how life goes. And, you can let that upset you, even though it's just, you do it too. We're all guilty of it to some degree, or you can just let it be like, oh, there's the person doing what people do, but that doesn't have to determine how I'm going to live my life, kind of a thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. The way that I kind of think about it or look at it is like, especially people who have not done much work around sort of socializing or like acceptance, mm-hmm. have really heavy judgments. And sometimes if you're not in a good place mentally, those can have a big impact on you and can feel really heavy. So one of the examples that comes to mind is my girlfriend and I were over at a friend's house with some other friends, mm-hmm. and some of the people were kind of new to each other and whatnot. And one of the women there saw that there was Christmas decorations out, and it was in the summer or something. Mm-hmm. And she flipped out like, oh my God, like, why are there Christmas decorations out? Like, this is so ugly and ridiculous. And like, it's not even close to Christmas. And like, what is happening? Why are you doing this? And, to me, it was a clear example of, and also the person whose decorations those weren't even there, but it's just a clear example to me of like sort of these judgments that people can form that don't have any real impact. And I think that's a prime example of the kinds of sort of judgments from others that just don't mean anything. Like it doesn't matter if she thinks that there shouldn't be Christmas Eve decorations. She has no context into why they're out. Like maybe they didn't put them away, but maybe it's something very sentimental to the person and they wanted to leave it out and wherever else. Right. So I think kind of one of the things I wanted to tunnel into a little bit more is this idea of like whether or not the judgment really matters, because there are other things, right? Where like, okay, if I go into a job interview and let's say I don't care what other people think, and I'm just cussing up a storm, and it's like, what's your greatest weakness? And it's like, well, I'm drunk all the time, and I show up to work drunk, and like, like I feel like different scenarios.
Right.
And probably the one that I want to like focus in on and figure out is sort of that first one that I was talking about, which is just like, here's this judgment, like you were saying, right? Like there's these judgments that people are going to form. Some of them have impact. And there is something to be said for letting things kind of roll off of you and saying like, I'm going to do my best to present myself. And if they like me or whatever else, then awesome. And if not, like I did my best. But then there's this other category of stuff that's just like, this person's opinion has no bearing on anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that really makes a difference. And although I do want to pull apart, the idea of, when it's someone you don't really know and they're just making gross assumptions based on like the Christmas lights example versus like someone like a family member who can't necessarily get away from like, parents wanting their child to go to a certain college. And, I remember almost getting or someone attempting to set me up with someone who decided to go to a certain college that he didn't want to go to, but his parents wanted him to go to. And I was like, yeah, no, I feel like I need someone who has a little bit more of a spine to make their own choices in life. But, it's kind of like that people pleasing type of behavior. When I see that kind of like thought process or actions and behaviors, I really think, you have to look at your self-worth and how much you tie up your self-worth with what other people think, which I think is something that you could develop like a practice. And this is not going to just be a quick fix overnight kind of a thing. It's like developing a self-worth practice to realize, who I am worthy of good things, even though you might not believe it internally. So that's where I think people need to look and start with, is looking at their self-worth and how they have to separate it out. As far as like how to do that, there's a lot of approaches. I'd be curious if you have any thoughts about that, Donovan.
Yeah, so the first sort of set of things that I would think about is being clear on sort of why you want to do things and the value they bring to you, or why they're important to you, or just how these different things impact you. Because in my own history, times when I have not been very clear on what I want are the times that I'm more susceptible to influence, or times that I'm not as clear on the value that something brings to me, I'm more susceptible to sort of this influence. So, for example, like I used to play a bunch of Pokemon Go, and I would be very nervous about doing that in public, even though it is a public sort of thing, right? You're supposed to go outside, walk around, do some stuff.
Right.
When I wasn't clear on the idea of like, listen, like this makes going outside for a walk more enjoyable. It gives me sort of something that I like. Other people may or may not see the value of that, but like I enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's at least a starting point to start grounding into. Now I know for a lot of people that's not nearly enough, right? It's very surface level, like, well, I like this thing, I just don't want other people to know I do it, or like I don't want them to form certain opinions of me. So the next thing that sort of comes to mind is at a higher level, like you were talking about, developing some of this like self-esteem stuff. Some of the tactics I have for that, or that I've seen, like one is sort of an accomplishments journal, right? To just give you a better idea of like, oh, okay, so here are all the things that I've done, here are all the things that are valuable. And that's kind of like a generic roundabout way of sort of addressing some of these concerns. And then another thing that has been really useful for me is sort of, I touched on it a little bit, but when I start feeling this pressure, right, of like, oh, people are going to judge me a certain way, thinking about sort of the context around what are the actual impacts, right? In what way does it change my life? And like you were saying, like, if it's people you're close to, then sometimes that might be more impactful depending on what the judgment is and what the details are and whatnot. But for the most part, if you're in a situation where you have people around you that care about you and support you, then there may be some friction, but overall it's going to be more positive because you end up in a place where you're happier doing the stuff that you actually want to do. And the people around you may not agree or whatever the situation is. But eventually, or as long as you are willing to stay in that frame of just like, well, this is something I find valuable and useful, eventually that will probably come around to it, or at least it will start being less of a contention point. I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling a bit. I'd be curious what you've got on your side.
Yeah, no, I get that with the, for a split second, I did have a judgment against you for doing Pokemon Go, because I think of like old retired people doing that. But I realize, when you started to explain it, and maybe that's another factor that I want to layer into this conversation, is that when you actually explain like, oh, this brings me happiness, this gives me exercise, and I'm like, oh, that's a great thing that you have that activity, them to make it fun to get outside. And so it kind of like released my judgment in that sense. And maybe still people will judge you if you don't explain, or you do explain. Maybe they won't, but I think when I think it's just like normal and natural for people to like make quick judgments, but when they understand like the full context, if you're open to explaining it to them, at least that way you can know where at least you've expressed yourself as fully as you can. So there's nothing in there like questioning, because it's like when people are making assumptions, it's based on what they know, but they don't know like the full picture. And if they got a better idea of the full picture, then, I think the judgment would be less. So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I also think it matters what the group is, because I feel like for pretty much any activity, you can find people who are going to support you or make, some sort of negative judgments, right? You if you look enough, you can find the people who are like, oh my God, you watch sports, like what a waste of time. Oh my God, you play video games, what a waste of time. Oh my God, you record a podcast, what a waste of time. Like you can find people who are going to judge any set of actions. So another piece of it is sort of knowing that, like in the same way as when you create content or art, you have to know that not everyone's going to like it. There's going to be some subset of people that don't like it and some subset that do. So I think just being realistic around the fact that you may not get acceptance from every single person,
right?
And using that as a baseline to start maybe working on some of these other exercises that we mentioned is helpful. Because I know for me in the past, like I would try to insulate myself in a way that like, oh, I'm never going to face any of these judgments. And that's how I won't care what people think, is like, I'll just not be in the picture. Like you won't be able to judge me. I won't be there.
Right.
And that's also just not a very realistic way of sort of thinking about these things.
Yeah. Thinking about that, I think I've developed myself enough to realize that, of course, I'm going to deal with judgments, but I think I've become a better communicator. And, if it really depends on if like I actually value their input or not. If it's just some like random guy from the internet, I'm like, I could care less that you made a mean comment on my, was like, who are you to like, you don't know me, that's fine. But if it was like a friend that I felt like didn't quite fully get it, I would probably take the effort to explain why that's important to me. And, I think if they were a good friend, they would understand. So I think my ability to communicate, so there's less of the assumption, like filling in the gap of knowledge of what they couldn't maybe fully understand it to the degree that I understand it. But I know that I can articulate a little bit better these days, hopefully, that, if they still don't get it, or if they still think it's a terrible idea, oh, well, that's okay. But the other thing I do want to mention, because I had this thought earlier, is that I think it's important to get, like, if you're making a big life decision, for example, and yeah, maybe you feel like people, like if you were going to move across the country for a relationship, which is something I did I did do that for a relationship. And, I decided that at the end of the day, it's my choice, and I'm going to follow my heart, but, that was a big decision. So I decided to like talk to a lot of friends, a lot of family, and just get some perspective and, take it with a grain of salt. Like I can, some things they could say really will resonate and make sense to not move. Some might say things that make sense to move. And so like I can collect all this knowledge and that kind of expands my own perspective, and I can make my final decision knowing that I did everything that I could. I got a lot of perspective. It helped me feel clear with my choice at the end of that.
Yeah, I think that is something very valuable, which is as the cost of the decision kind of goes up, right? When it's something important, and this goes back to what I was talking about right at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
It's not about not caring at all what other people think.
Yeah,
it's about being able to sort of assimilate that information or the other people's feedback and opinions. And as the cost of the sort of thing goes up, being able to take on more of that information, kind of sort through it and figure out what's useful to you and what's not, so that you can ultimately make the final decision, right? Of like, okay, I've weighed out all the pros and cons based on what everyone's telling me and whatnot. I've decided that I'm going to move forward with this, as opposed to, sort of this thing of just like, everybody who doesn't want me to do this is a hater and nobody cares. And I'm just going to do it because I need to do it. And I think it actually goes to something fairly important about this conversation as a whole, which is basically that the many people are sort of operating in this mode where they think the way I want to live is likely what's going to be best for everyone else, right? That's where you get a lot of these judgments, where you get things like, well, I don't want to play Pokemon Go. That's going to like ruin my walk and not let me see anything. And I'm just going to be staring at my phone. Like, what a waste of time. Like, you get some of these projections around like, hey, if I was in the same situation, I wouldn't want to do that, or I wouldn't like that. I would hate if my Christmas decorations were out in the middle of the summer. So like, I'm going to very vehemently be like, why are you doing this? This shouldn't be how it is. And I think that's a very common thing for people to, well, I mean, we can't step out of it, right? We only have our experience. So most people are not consciously taking the steps or really trying to go like, okay, wait, let me try to flip the perspective. And I think, like you were saying before, sort of being able to explain or have a conversation or discuss some of the points can help open that up a bit more.
Right.
But that's another thing to think about, is a lot of people are basically operating from their experience in a way that they map what they think would be nice onto you, and that may or may not be true. And that's where you get some of the biggest disconnects, right? Like with sort of that college situation, right? I imagine that to some degree, the parents must have thought like, I don't know why you would go to this other school. Like, if it was me, I would go to the school that I'm telling you to go to. And if people care about you, then for the most part, that's the frame they're operating out of. And that perspective may or may not map onto what it is that you actually experience and want to do and all this other stuff.
Yeah, that actually brings me to another point that I want to add on to the original point of, when you are evaluating other people's perspectives, one, you gotta like distinguish, like separate out the people, whose opinions don't really care about. They're not really important. Like, if it's like close friends and family, I think it's okay to like get their input and value their feedback. But it kind of just made me think of like, they're coming from a place of care usually when they are like a loved one, and they want what's best for you and from their perspective, which may not be what you think is best for you from your own perspective. It's just two different vantage points. But to not get upset if they're like wanting you to do one thing, because underneath it all, they're coming from a place of love and care. And you have a difference of opinions and agreements. And, ultimately, when it came like going back to my moving across the country example, it was like a scary decision. It was a big decision. But I do remember one of the things that my mom said that was actually very supportive, which was very surprising because I wasn't sure if she'd be supportive of that venture, was she said, if you don't do this, you're going to regret it. And I was like, that's a good point. Because if I don't like it, I could always just move back. I had friends, such good friends in Seattle. I love Seattle when I was living in there. So I was leaving like something that was comfortable for something, I thought could be even better for my life. And ultimately it was like a that relationship didn't work out, but I have no regrets because it led me to meeting my current husband. So it all worked out in the end. But it's just kind of like taking apart the opinions that matter most to you, but like to see underneath it all, it's like they're coming from a place of care. And it doesn't mean, you have to listen to what they're saying you should do because they care. But I would say value their feedback and their input, but take it with a grain of salt. Yes.
Yeah, because ultimately, I don't know about you, but any decision I've made completely or mostly because I was trying to figure out or please other people or make them not judge me. Mm-hmm. I have not been happy in those situations.
Right.
And it hasn't done anything for my relationships, mm-hmm. right? Sure, there may have been very, very small instances where I'm like, oh, well, I'm not going to express this thing in this new group of people that I'll never see again because it might not go over well. But in all the relationships and instances and things that actually matter, yeah, making decisions based on what I thought other people would do has not brought me any joy and has not brought me any better relationships. And I think that's another thing to think about is sort of what you lose and what you gain, right? Something we've sort of talked about before. But in every situation I can think of, I have lost more than I've gained by trying to sort of like go based on these opinions. Another thing that just came to mind that has been very frequent in these kinds of thoughts in my life is determining whether or not they're true. Like there are times when I feel like I'm going to be judged for something that no one cares about.
Right.
A recent example is someone asked me, like, is it stupid to carve pumpkins? Like, are we too old for this? And it's just interesting because it's like, well, if you have the desire to do it, it doesn't matter. The example I used at that point was like, it's the same with coloring books, right? There are adult coloring books, and quite a few people find joy and value in doing coloring books, which is on the surface, right? Like a kid's activity. It's at least, generally what comes to mind,
right.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. You know what else is generally a kid's activity is sports. And like sports go all the way up to all sorts of age ranges and whatnot. So that's another thing to think about or consider is sometimes I have seen or been victim of sort of these, people are going to judge me for this, or this is the way things should be, or I'm at a certain age or point in my life or in a certain position or whatever else that I shouldn't be doing particular things. And sometimes the judgments don't even exist. It's me pretending what other people are going to judge me for. And identifying some of those has made it a lot easier too, to just be like, the judgment's not even here. I'm imagining people are going to care what I do. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I've been on both sides of that, and I could even think of like incidences where friends might have thought I judged them for that something, and I just like, it didn't even occur to me to think of that. It's like, you think of that? I was like, oh yeah. Or another example of when you use the am I too old for this example? I went to a water park with a friend, adult friend, who did have a child at the time, but we didn't bring any children to this water park. It was just two grown adults at the water park having a blast without any children. And I was like, I wonder what other people think, because everyone's here with like as a family with children. But ultimately I was able to let it go because I was like, we're having a blast. This is fun. Adults can enjoy water slides too. Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point that you raised, that you've been on both sides of it, because I've also experienced both sides of it, where I've had friends that know that I, care about psych and mental health and self-improvement and all that stuff. And for example, they'll be trying to quit smoking or something, and they'll be like, yeah, I was doing okay for a couple of weeks, and then I fell off and now I've been smoking again. And it's like, I didn't want to tell you because I thought you were going to judge me and think that I'm weak-willed or whatever else. And it's like, that's the opposite of the position I hold. Like I'm like any goal that you want to undertake and any progress that you make, to me is awesome. And like, if you want to talk about different strategies for getting you closer, different tactics or whatever else, cool. If you don't want to talk about that, totally cool. Like, I support you in whatever you want to do. Anyway, I have also experienced both sides of it. And it's just interesting because, again, these judgments are not really founded on anything. We're just sort of making them up and imagining, like you were saying, like at the water park, right?
Yeah.
Probably no one even noticed. No one could even tell.
Right. They were caught up in their own water slide fun, so wouldn't be even paying attention.
Yeah. So I think, again, going to the core of some of these issues or topics, one of the things, like the outcome that you want is to feel really grounded and secure in your choices.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the path there can take quite a few different angles, and it takes time. And that's another thing. I think I've mentioned quite a few tools that I use now, but it took me time to really buy into those and be able to use them more frequently. And I'm sure I still fall victim to some of these things, but far more frequently than in the past, I'm able to go like, oh, I want to do this thing. And like we were talking about, like some people are probably going to judge me for it. And some people are probably going to think it's the wrong thing to do. And some people are going to think it's the right thing to do and whatever else. But at the end of the day, 99% of that has no impact on my life whatsoever. So I'm just going to keep doing the things that I actually enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought of this other point that I wanted to make was, you know, if you did like to make all your decisions based on what other people are thinking, and like your parents wanting you to go to a certain school that you don't want to, it's like, yeah, you could choose that choice, but ultimately you're going to end up resenting and being upset and really not that happy. And it really takes a lot of self-reflection to kind of go deep. And maybe you don't know what you want. That's another scenario of like, I don't know what I want, so I'm just going to let opinions sway me to whatever it is, because I'm not clear with myself. But, you know, even though I mentioned, you know, it's important to get a lot of different perspectives, to get a lot of different opinions, to expand your own, I think it's also important to kind of sit with yourself, and just kind of reflect and tune in, whether that's journaling or just having some quiet alone time to be with yourself, even as uncomfortable as that can be also beneficial too.
Yeah. Giving yourself, if you have the luxury of giving yourself some space, and you mentioned some good ways to do that.
Yeah.
If you have the luxury of being able to do that for a particular decision, it can help a lot, because it's so easy to just get wrapped up in sort of this endless vortex of like, what are these people thinking? And I think they're thinking this and all this stuff, and end up feeling very, very uncomfortable or insecure or uncertain about certain choices. Whereas if you give yourself the space, and focus sort of on that particular thing, more often you're able to come up with a clearer, stronger answer, as opposed to getting kind of bullied around by all the other ideas floating in your head.
Yeah. Or, you know, maybe even working with a therapist or a coach, life coach or something, because they're working in your best interest too, and kind of can help navigate through all the thoughts that you have to come to that conclusion, versus like if it's your family member, they might be biased or like their own personal experiences and things like that. So they might have a more colored perception versus working with a professional. Not to say that it's not that's impossible with a professional. It can still happen with a professional, but you know, they're a little more trained to work in your best interest. Yeah,
they have no incentive, or again, like I was mentioning before, they are trained out of, to the best of that they can be, out of sort of that, hey, here's how I think the world is nice, so you should do what I think is nice, and more towards like, you tell me what you think is nice, and then we'll figure out how to get you there.
Right. Yeah. Kind of a sense of self-discovery in that way. Cool. All right. Well, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Was there any last points you wanted to make, Donovan?
No, I think that pretty much is it. You know, it just comes down to sort of getting grounded in some way, potentially finding sort of the groups that you need to support you, because that's another thing, is people can feel really awkward and judged and care a lot about what people think when they're in the wrong group for the things that they actually enjoy doing. And then, you know, some of these other more general exercises can really help a lot. But other than that, that's sort of the best pieces I've found for how to not care so much about what other people are thinking.
Yeah. Really important. Great points. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.